Hey everyone, today I'm back with Asaf on Meet the Expert discussing.
Tara and threat modeling.
All right, let's do it. All right, Asaf, thank you so much for joining us again on Meet the Expert. And today we're going to talk about threat modeling and not just threat modeling in general. We've been seeing a lot of discussion surrounding automotive regulation coming into play that specifically surrounds threat modeling. We have it in medical, we have it in industrial, and it's something that's really taking over. So I guess to begin, what is Tara and threat modeling, this term that we've heard so much about?
Sure. Hey, Rafi. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
So let's start with what TARA stands for. TARA is actually an acronym for threat analysis and risk assessment. And honestly, it's quite an old concept. I'd say that TARA has been used in the automotive industry probably almost 15 years already. And even that, maybe just to root to the history, is rooted in something else, which was more from the functional safety perspective, which was called HARA with an H. HARA stands for hazards analysis as opposed to threat analysis. And back in the days, and still to this day, when you design a vehicle, right, you need to put in place all those design decisions, whether they are hardware or software, to make sure the car is safe, to make sure that when there are any kind of natural circumstances that might jeopardize the safety of the road users, all those controls are in place to protect you as a driver. When the notion of cybersecurity started to emerge with all the connectivity and the computerization of vehicles, many of the automotive designers started to realize that in that connected world, actually the safety of road users and potentially other kind of threats could also be mounted on vehicle, not just by natural circumstances, but also potentially by any kind of a malicious intent, like hackers trying to hack into vehicles and create some damage. And so there was a need to build into the design of vehicles also a methodology that takes into account all the things that can actually be compromised in the vehicle or can go wrong in the vehicle from, let's say, malicious intent or malicious circumstances. And this is how the TARA came into place. TARA, in essence, is basically a methodology. It's a methodology, and we can go into all the steps, but the bottom line is that you basically try to build all the different damage scenarios and all the different threat scenarios that potential adversaries can cause to road users in the vehicles. And once you have that, then you can basically put in place all those security controls that would lower that risk and reduce the risk to a manageable level. This is the original of TARA. And as I said before, this actually has been going around and been done as part of the vehicle development lifecycle for many years already.
Yeah, and again, it's by no means, as you mentioned, a new idea, but I'm just wondering, even though you mentioned that it offers a guide on what to do or how to consider or what to consider during Tara or during threat modeling, is there a, is there a way that teams should ideally try to conduct it, not only follow guides? Because in cybersecurity, when it comes to regulation, historically we know that a lot of teams, not all teams, but many teams have focused on a checkbox method. Okay, do we have this check? Do we have that check? And we're seeing regulations, at least in automotive and medical, move away from that mindset to more so say you need to really embody a mindset of security and not just check boxes along the way. And with that, we're seeing here at Cybellum that it doesn't only apply to threat modeling, it applies across the way documentation is produced, is managed, is handled, is shared. And so what is a team that, let's say, is mature in their product security? How should they go about not only conducting threat modeling, but what should the mindset be?
Yeah, it's a great point because, as I said, it's an old methodology, but for many years it wasn't formalized in a very good way. And basically, you would end up having different architects in organization, each one kind of bring their own notion or idea of how to do Tara. You would have different tools, different documents, different formats, different level of rigidity. And that created a problem because later down the line, when you need to make decisions to the level of what software you write, there was no conformance or conformity around how to do that and how developers should interpret a lot of the things that were written in these documents. Every document looked a little different depending on the architect. As you know, definitely in the automotive industry, it's an industry that is kind of evolving with a lot of mergers and acquisitions, investing and divesting. So suddenly you could inherit a new business unit that has a completely different set way to do that. And I think one thing that really changed it all is when the automotive industry as a whole started to put down standards, and most notable the ISO 21434. And when they wrote that standard, there was a lot of focus on trying to formalize a small set of methodologies and a small set of definitions when you need to apply Tara, how Tara should look like, what does it need to cover. And that helped in at least two ways. First of all, it really changed the methodology from something that was, I would say, even to a larger extent, voluntarily. Every company kind of decide if they have the time, the money, which components should deserve Tara or not, to something that at the end of the day, you cannot pass regulations if you don't apply that to the component that are considered cybersecurity relevant. That by itself started to make a lot of the OEMs very nervous because they needed now to apply that to a much larger extent inside the organization. But the second thing is that it also helped in creating something which is more uniform. And that meant that you now need to start managing your Tara as an IT system. You need to have all this information defined in machine-readable format. You need all this information in your IT systems. You need to be able to share that information across different stakeholders. So the entire notion of Tara has shifted from something which is, I would say, almost poetry to an extent, a bunch of documents, into something that is much more data-driven, much more IT system, much more shareable. And we'll talk about it probably soon, but that meant that anyone who's providing software or is providing IT systems suddenly needed to start caring more about this, this idea of Tara.
Well, so yeah, it's really obvious to us now. Perhaps it wasn't as obvious prior, but if you were to, let's say you have 100 ECUs in the vehicle, which is not that far off from what we have today.
Right.
And due to budgetary restraints, timing, who knows, a million reasons, you say, okay, we're going to check 90 of them. We're going to do a really good job. And 10%, it'll be okay. We don't have the resources to check them. Well, then you're exposing your entire vehicle due to a lack of funds or whatever the reason. So I'm definitely happy to see the regulation come into play and the automotive industry pick it up and run with it the way it has. My final question for you is, one, how does Cybellum go about Tara and threat modeling? And number two is, what does it look like in practice? So not only how do you conduct threat modeling, but what does it look like once you have conducted it? What do you do with it?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I think you need to understand that for many years, even though Tara was practiced, as I said, it was a very static exercise, let's call it. What I mean is that, you had a bunch of architects that created all these documentations. They were fueled into the set of requirements, and that usually meant the end of the practice. From that point on, it moved to purchasing, it moved to design. It was seldom that anyone taken another look at the Tara once all those other steps started to put into practice. And only, you could have scenarios when suddenly there's an incident, and that incident is potentially affecting your vehicle, but you're not sure in what way does it affect. You're not sure if maybe you have the security controls that mitigate that incident and you don't need to do anything. You don't need to worry about it, or maybe not. Maybe you now need to create a software update, or even worse, to recall some of your vehicles. you would now have a very hard time to find out all this documentation, find the teams that were involved, because that could happen 5 years after the Tara was conducted. And in general, you had a problem of traceability. How do you trace something that happens 5 years after that in the vehicle to what was defined as the risk level? This is now changing, and we're kind of moving from this static exercise to something I would call dynamic risk management. And what I mean by that is, once all this information is available in an IT system, first of all, it's persisted, right? Even if the teams change, even if the vehicle evolved to other generation, the data is there, the data is kept, the data is traced. The other thing is that now you can much more easily trace things that go down the line into those original assumptions that you made. Just a few examples. When you go and trace your set of requirements, very often you would make a lot of economic trade-offs, whether you put this chipset or that chipset, whether you put this mitigation or that mitigation. With the Tara data inside, you can now understand exactly what is the impact of each of these decisions. And maybe that would mean that you, as much as you would like to go to, I don't know, a piece of hardware which is more economically viable, that potentially increase the risk to a level that you cannot do that. Tara helps you figure that out. Another example, let's say the vehicle is already in the road and suddenly there's an incident, or suddenly there's a new vulnerability. You could quite more easily understand what is the impact of that vulnerability. Does it impact your safety? Does it impact your maybe it presents a financial risk? And what is the potentially derivative mitigation that you need to apply against that vulnerability to basically bring the risk down to the level that it needs to be? And this is exactly what we're trying to do with Cybellum. Because Cybellum is a security platform that really manages cybersecurity across the entire life cycle, from the design phase all the way to the production, and even when the cars are in the field. Having the Tara data inside allows you at every point in time to query against that data, whether it's on the requirement level, whether it's on the vulnerability management level, or whether it's on the incident response level, and understand your risk and take the right decision. And how do we do that practically? So first of all, we already introduced in version 3.0 the idea of importing Teradata into the system. So today we support the Item is Secure tool, which is one of the probably the market leader in generating Tara. We also support importing any kind of Teradata from a CSV format. And once you do that, you have all the data in the system. You could even have multiple revisions of that data. And then once you have that, what we're building into the platform is that when you conduct those other activities, whether these are the requirements management, whether these are vulnerability management, whether these are the incident response, first of all, you'll be able to query for the Tara data. So you'll be able to trace and match the Tara from any other point in the system. We will allow you to understand the new level of risk every time there's a new vulnerability in the context of the Tara. And we will help you to basically create the tickets to other parts of the organization to put the right mitigation to manage the risk or bring the risk back to the level that it needs. And that context, the context of not just understanding a vulnerability, in a vacuum, but understanding it in a very specific context of that threat analysis you were doing in the very early stages of the design, really give it the very accurate and the right picture of how to manage that security that you need to manage.
Wow, I love how you not only explained in this conversation threat modeling and how we do it, but also the history of threat modeling up until now. I think that's great. That's a great point. How it used to be just kind of another rubber stamp, another piece of documentation. And now it's like, okay, well, let's do it more efficiently and let's use it. Let's actually make decisions based on it, which I would think that a lot of times, you mentioned the financial decisions, which chipsets to use, which components to use, that perhaps it just saves a lot of the headache. It explains already or it helps you decide already what it is you should go with. So instead of just the financial, you're like, well, a regulator may ask about this. How am I going to respond in an audit? Okay, let's do that one. Cool. All right, Asaf, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Rafi.
Bye.